Hello,
Hello,
everybody.
and welcome to Coffee Class with Young Screenwriters. We are an online resource and community for up-and-coming screenwriters, and today we are breaking down a brand new pilot, Disney Marvel pilot, Loki.
Hey,
This is part of our new foray into the world of TV and series, and we're super excited about it because this one is sort of a interesting, not a crossover, but has like an interesting relationship with a whole movie franchise that makes it special.
well, not just a movie franchise, like a cinematic universe. And this is like
Yes.
using information relationships and payoffs from previous movies as like a foil. And that's like really unique and interesting. And all the Marvel shows are doing that, which is kind of cool. It's cool to see that play out.
It's really neat. It feels like we're seeing something new, like a really new extension of that kind of world. And I've been having fun with it. It's right now, unless I'm missing one, it's Loki and WandaVision, the two
Yes.
that have done it so far. And we're going to do WandaVision also, probably this month. So we'll be able to compare the two because they both go about this differently, but in really fun and unique ways.
What this show does is it's more overtly referencing the plot of the movies and specifically using setup from that and information. Although I do think you could appreciate this without knowing the movies. Though the movies are definitely like knowing who Thanos is like part of understanding and appreciating the show, you know?
Yeah. If you all were here a couple weeks ago when we had a guest, James Felder, he did a lot of work with Marvel, and he is like one of the heads of episodic TV at NYU Tisch Film, and he talked to us a lot about Marvel and specifically about these shows and how it's kind of a new type of pilot in a lot of ways because it gets to break form, which goes back to that cinematic universe thing that we were talking about, that these pilots are not written like other pilots. Like they're not structured, like they have a lot of things in common with pilots because there's the natural form that we're gonna talk about, but they're not the kind of thing you would write as a spec script. And by that I mean an original script. And if people are unfamiliar with that, in film, a spec script means a script you write. No one's paying you for it. You're writing it on speculation. You're just doing it for yourself, and you're hoping you'll sell it or get a job with it or something. A spec script in TV typically means you're writing your own episode of an existing show. But in this case, I'm talking about you wouldn't necessarily write a pilot, an original pilot that looks like Loki or looks like WandaVision because of the way that it's playing with form. And we're going to get into that more.
Amazing.
Cool.
Well, do you want to do your breakdown and then we can talk about it? Really quick, high-level stuff? And
yeah. So doing a top-level breakdown, I'm going to keep you on the screen, Adam.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just here with me. So basically, this is about, there's two main plots that we're looking at right now, and they might change later, but right now we have an A and a B, and the protagonist of our A plot is Loki. He's the god of mischief. We know immediately that he's fallen from power quite a bit. He's becoming irrelevant, which we know much faster than he does, but he's also a narcissist, and he thinks that he's still great. And his whole passion, which we probably know from the films, and then also he tells us very quickly, is that he wants to rule. He wants to be a god, and that's his whole thing. So when we meet him, it's in Avengers Endgame, which is interesting, in a moment when he is captured, when he escapes. He escapes, and then the series picks up that he is captured by this agency called the Time Variant Authority, and they are capturing him because he's messing with the timeline. So then we meet the other character, the lead of our B plot, who is Mobius. He is a agent of this time variant authority, and he, as far as I can tell, based on this, his grand passion is to understand Loki better, which we understand more later. So the world they create together is that Loki is now captured by the time variant authority. Loki wants to get out. Mobius has control over him and wants to learn more about Loki. This pushes us into Act 2, where all Loki wants is to escape, and all Mobius wants is, we're not entirely sure. He's trying to show him his life. He's trying to like win him over and basically tell him some hard truths for a reason we're not entirely sure about yet. And Loki is super defiant. So most of the obstacles in this case are created by the tension between the two characters. Loki wants to escape. Mobius doesn't want him to. There's physical things that stop him from escaping, like the fact that people can zap you into non-existence. But also, what Mobius is showing him is intriguing him in some way. He's showing him clips of his life, and so that's another reason why he doesn't want to escape. Where I put as the midpoint of the episode, which I'm curious to know if people agree or disagree, is that Mobius is briefly called away and Loki breaks out of the room. So he's making his way out of the time variant authority. He's not achieved his objective because he's still trying to get out, but he's broken out of the room. Everyone's swarming, trying to find him. Mobius is trying to track him down again. The stakes are escalating because now the other agents want to kill Loki, where Mobius wants him alive. The whole thing is getting worse and worse. And then we move into Act 3, where Loki ends up going back to his cell. And he's looking at the machine by himself, flipping through his life. And in this moment, an unexpected consequence is that he realizes he has nowhere to go, that he doesn't belong anywhere. And he believes the stories that Mobius is telling him. And that moves us into the new world and the hook for the entire series, which Mobius tells to Loki, which is that I want your help, I need your help, tracking down an extremely dangerous variant, someone who's messing up a timeline. And by the way, the variant is you. So it's a different version of him. So that's the hook for the entire series. That's the inciting incident for all of what I'd imagine is at least season 1. I guess we don't know yet how these Marvel seasons are what their shape is gonna take, but that's at least the hook for season 1.
Great job. Awesome. I agree. The midpoint is when he breaks out. Although it doesn't happen directly in the middle of the episode, like functionally, like that's like the major turning point of like narrative action, like where he goes after against the status quo of his capture. I think one thing I would mention that they early on established that Mobius is working on a case.
Yes.
And we know he's trying to solve the case. So like I felt it was pretty clear that his attempts to get Loki were just somehow to help him with his own case. Like I feel like that in this episode, like it is pretty clear, like how, because they showed us that scene before he interrupted the courtroom. That's how I would define. I wouldn't qualify that as a grand passion, but I would say
for a setup, right? Yeah,
right. It's definitely like his desire, Mobius's desire in the episode is to get help solving this case he's having difficulty with. Mm-hmm. The one thing I want to bring up is, so what I was pleasantly surprised about watching this, because I just watched the pilot last night. I'm extremely excited to continue with it. Although I do know spoilers for the most recent episode, which I won't get into. So I think that the best like hour-long TV shows really go into like the philosophical beliefs of who the characters are and putting them into conflict. And it was really great, I thought. That scene with the whole episode in a way. Yeah, there's the external conflict of Mobius is trying to get information out of Loki. Loki wants to escape. There's that, but below it, in terms of Loki's beliefs about himself and who he is and what he wants to be, all of those things are like being challenged. And you could say like the whole concept of this show is to redefine who Loki is. He's not going to be some sort of like silly, like another wannabe ruler of the cosmos. Like space is pretty big. Like that scene, like, do you really want to rule space? Like sort of going to the idea, the moment for me that was really the new world philosophically about what we're going to explore about like who Loki is was when he said, "I don't want to hurt people. It's a form of weakness. It's something I hurt people as a show of fake strength." The fact that he actually, I'm paraphrasing, but the fact that he said that out loud right at the end where we were starting to get to the new world of like, okay, these two guys are going to team up to hunt the other variant Loki and his time travel adventures, all of that stuff. We're going to be exploring who that guy is. Who's the Loki? That's not the Loki from the movies. That's the Loki who's like just had a dark moment with the soul and looked at himself in the mirror and said like, I'm weak.
Yeah.
And also that was a whole arc in this episode.
It was. And it was, that's a man who just watched himself and his mom die.
Right.
Like right. It was a lot. We talk about that a lot in film too, is that like, it takes a lot for people to change. It's like, well, okay, if he's going to have this arc over the course of this episode, then he's going to have to go through a freaking lot. So what do? They show him a place where Infinity Stones don't matter, where he has no powers, where everything is irrelevant and he's a nobody. And then they also show him dying and show him getting his mom killed. And, something is, I've seen the pilot twice now, but I've not seen the rest of it. And then Adam, you've seen the pilot once, but you have seen the rest of it. And honestly, like I saw Avengers Endgame, but I had to ask Carl over and over, like what actually happened because of all the like time. Like I couldn't remember what was,
a lot happened in that movie, in those two movies.
I was like, was he supposed to be like, what happened? Is this different? Is this like, which timeline is this? Like, what's going on? So I think but I still knew the characters, which I think is the point. Because like, even if you're like me and you've seen it, but you don't necessarily remember, like, was he meant to be captured? Did they know that this is what was happening? We have to say
that neither Alexie or I, neither of us are huge Marvel fans at best. So we apologize for any like lore mistakes. It is not my particular wheelhouse.
No, I enjoy it, and I watch all the films. But I've watched all of WandaVision, and I'll watch all of this. But I would never claim to be someone who knows Marvel.
Right. So let's talk about for a second how they used the movies as setup. Like, so on one hand, I actually don't think that this episode was as different as I was expecting it to be from like a traditional, like I thought it actually was a little more self-contained than I was expecting. It is using a character and our assumptions about the character to like play off certain moments. Like the shot of Loki watching his mother die and watching his father tell him he loved him in Thor and watching his own death. Like those moments have a lot less meaning if you haven't watched the movies. But I do think it worked emotionally. Like the audience still, if they had never seen anything else in Marvel, they understood that this guy was a god of mischief, that he's a rule breaker. He's deeply confused about who he is and what he wants, and he's in a moment of conflict in life. That's all the important stuff. And here's the thing: there's a bad version of this show that relies too much on on lore, that relies too much on previous callbacks. So I did think this actually really worked by itself.
I think it absolutely does. I think I'd be curious if anybody who's with us now saw it but didn't know Loki beforehand, like didn't know this version of the character by Tom Hiddleston, right? Yeah, didn't know this guy, didn't know Avengers Endgame, and just was coming at this fresh. I'd be really curious what that was like. So if that's you, comment. I feel like it might be kind of hard to actually find somebody who watched this but also hasn't seen any of it. But anyway, I think that's you know what, that's actually a point though. I think that the thing with this pilot that's kind of unique is that it can work for people. It can work for people who are unfamiliar with like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
It's for people who are. Like, and that's kind of, that was something that James talked about, was that like they're caring less about what you would normally care about in a pilot, which is like, we need to get everyone up to speed. We need to make sure everyone understands everything that's going on. We need to know who these people are, and you have to start from ground zero. Loki and then also WandaVision don't care. If you don't know who they are, then they're not necessarily going to catch you up immediately. Like, you can kind of roll with it, kind of like jumping into a season late, and it won't be bad, but it's not going to be as good as if you know this world and if you know these characters already. It's definitely for people who are already familiar, which is, I think, one of the big reasons why it's so unusual. That and the fact that it's treating films as like an act, like a very extended act one, you know, like it's, I don't know. Would you agree with that, Adam? That it's kind of like the Avengers Endgame is like, it's almost like an act one, pre-act one movie situation. And then
in terms of narratively, this setting up the show, yeah, they're using information from that for sure. But also whatever movie they showed footage of from was set in 2012. I think it was one of the Avengers movies, obviously. But
oh yeah.
Also, just FYI, that footage looked terrible compared to like, it looks so flat and lifeless, like full of like no color, compared to the like Loki is such a gorgeously shot show, has such a unique aesthetic. Like, the footage from the old did not mix well.
I feel like that must have been why they did it on like that like weird projection that didn't look that good. I mean, it was a smart way to play it, where it kind of like looked more pixelated or something. Yeah, let's see. We're interested in the vision of someone unfamiliar with the universe. It makes critiques feel less. Yeah, I totally agree, Marco. I would be curious as well. I don't know. I'm gonna have to like make my friends watch it who don't do Marvel at all.
I think they were talking about us. They were talking about us.
Oh, a bit unfamiliar. A bit. I am a bit unfamiliar.
Yes, you are. We are both a bit. This is us, Alexie.
I thought we were talking about like my friend who does not go to superhero movies, making them sit down.
I've only seen about half the Marvel movies, and some of them I really enjoyed, and some of them I just like really had trouble getting through. I think I think Kevin Feige is a great writer. I do not think he's a very good director, and you can tell the movies where he's like making like shot choice decisions. Or maybe it was the Joss Whedon films. I just really think they're not well made. Like these random shots of like why is the camera moving? Like, there's so many moments where it just feels so artless. And then there's some movies like Black Panther or Ant-Man or something like that feel like really cohesive. They're the Jon Favreau movies that are like, oh, this is put together well. Sorry, I'm pissing people off, I'm sure. But my point is, this show is extremely well directed and such a really strong point of view, like in this production design, the feeling, the music. Like, this almost feels like the images they're using are very much like 1950s imagery, but like a government agency, like a secret government agency from the 50s. What you think that would be, but like sci-fi. It's kind of interesting, like the animation style they used, like the buttons on the elevators. Like, it's a really interesting mix of like anachronistic technology and, you know, the ability to phase time and shit. I'm
curious to. I guess there's a few things I want to talk about in general, but one of the things was when Adam, you were talking about like the philosophical stuff that we get into, like the philosophical stakes and his like whatever the theme is going to be about this, which seems based on the fact that I've seen this pilot and I've not seen the rest of the series, it seems like it's going to be this thing about like fate and like who you are and like how much of your life you get to choose. And like, is Loki going to be able to choose to like defy what he's meant to be? And like, who defines what he's meant to be?
Right.
I think here's a question for us. Are Marvel movies cinema? What's your guys'
This is
take
based
on
on the Martin Scorsese comment where
I say yes.
Several years ago, Martin Scorsese, just to give context, several years ago, Martin Scorsese very publicly said that he didn't think that the Marvel films and like movies like it are doing what cinema does. It like doesn't have the same purpose. He said it's more like an amusement park. It resembles cinema, but it's like a fun ride, right? Where he said it's not necessarily about, and in terms of my opinion, I think he's actually right 70% of the time. But there are great movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Black Panther specifically. That feels like a movie with a strong point of view, and like where editing and directing and music decisions all feel like they're coming from the same place. Iron Man 3 or the both of the first two Avengers movies. I'm sorry, but like they are just poorly directed, like really weird like decisions that don't make any sense from like any filmmaking point of view, where it's very clearly like, okay, this is a committee of executives who've all argued about like what's happening. And then like, this is the result.
I guess it comes down to like, what is cinema? And I don't know. I feel like sometimes cinema is used as a term to like, it strikes me as like a pretentious sort of like gatekeeping thing when people use it in this way.
But how else do we define? But like, there has to be a word we can use to define.
It's kind of like, is it good? Like, is it like?
No, I don't think that's fair.
In a way,
I don't think that's fair though, because like I personally think that like there's a pretentious version that is gatekeepy of that argument, and then there's like an actually nuanced perspective. Like because what I think Scorsese was saying wasn't actually pretentious. Like he was trying to get at something that is real, which is specifically the conversation in the context was about independent theaters dying in America. And like that and the fact that there's no market for like independent small stories with small perspectives, like really nuanced character studies and things like stories that aren't about, you know, a giant IP that has like lunchboxes.
To me though, it's like, I think that this is what Theo said this comment, which I think is good. I think there are different types of films with different intentions, entertainment versus introspection maybe, and that's okay and can coexist equally. That's kind of where I'm getting at, is that I think that like sometimes, like I think that it's just like a different genre, but I think that sometimes when people talk about like what is cinema and what's not, it's coming from a place of like a hierarchy of like what's good art, like what's art and what's not. And it becomes like, even if it's not, there is a difference between a Marvel film and like an art house film. Like there just tends to be a difference, but
there's also a difference between a good Marvel film and a bad Marvel film is what I'm trying to say. Like the bad Marvel films are like really artless, and I wouldn't call them cinema. Like in the sense of they don't have it's a series of photographed images with famous characters going through plot lines. And a lot of the moments are like, you could tell there were like 20 writers. It's all kind of by committee. Not saying that when it's good, because when it's good, it's like, it's really good. And I feel like some really creative voices have made movies in the Marvel universe. So like, I really like some of it. But I do think Age of Ultron is like pretty unforgivable. And like, I would not call that cinema. The same way I wouldn't call it like a bad movie, like something.
It like reminds me though of like when sometimes people call like particular forms of like dance, not dance, but like sport or something. Like when people are trying to be, or like I've heard it in martial arts, like people say that Taekwondo isn't a martial art, it's a sport, you know, and it kind of feels like the same kind of thing where it's like, maybe, but like, is it a useful categorization?
So maybe we do need a different term. Maybe what I'm talking about is senseless corporate storytelling.
Yes.
No, right,
Yeah,
really, I'm trying to say, like,
yeah,
how do I
yeah, no,
explain
for real.
that, right? Like, where for example, I feel very strongly that, and this isn't just for any social reason, but it's really specifically about Ryan Coogler. I think that the first Black Panther movie is a great story that's
Mhm.
really, you could tell it's one person's vision. And I don't mean like, oh, one director has to have all the power. That's not what I'm saying. But it feels like a cohesive, coherent piece of storytelling that's internally consistent. And the decisions across the board are made to service that story rather
Yeah.
than being like, why'd that happen? Oh, just because some executive wanted to pee on it. Like, that
Yeah.
didn't happen on that particular project. I feel like the Spider-Man movies, the Tom Holland movies, I feel like are really fun. I feel like they feel like movies. Like, it's like there's some movies. Yeah. Oh, and the Infinity War and Endgame felt like movies. They were overwhelming. It was something. I enjoyed them though, and I don't want to try to be like a gatekeeper, because you think you're totally right, Alexie, that some people try to like be like, well, it's not real art, it's not cinema. But I do think there's an argument to be said, like, we have to distinguish senseless corporate filmmaking from like filmmaking from a point of view.
I think that makes complete sense. It's like what was created in like a boardroom and like what was in like what was created by people wanting to tell a story. Like, it's like what came first, story or the bottom line in some cases. Right. And you can feel that. And if that's what people are thinking about when they talk about cinema, then I can see that. I wish it was a better term for like, it's basically just like story driven or like money driven is kind of how I think about it. But I feel like this one to me felt story driven. And I mean, like, it's also money driven because it's Disney, Marvel, and it's, Loki. But like you were saying, it felt like it had a point of view and it felt like it had a theme. I think theme a lot of times is the thing that, like, being authentic to the theme and to the character's arc is the thing that helps me decide which side of the story or money thing it falls on.
And I totally agree, and I just want to like clarify that I think this isn't like it isn't a black and white like categorization. Like, I think any film that's ever been made is like somewhere on the spectrum of like, of course, there are pragmatic, money-driven marketing decisions that go behind great pop culture art. Like, I'm not like giving like a fake argument to sort of say that, oh, some things are not like that. I don't think that's true, but you have to look at the end result and the end experience and like as a story being told. Sometimes, sometimes doesn't. I agree. Loki is great though. I really think that this feels like a strong point of view. And I feel like Disney as a whole is learning how to trust its writers into the TV setting. Like, I really feel like The Mandalorian, Jon Favreau's show, feels like very story driven, and it feels like it's character driven in a way that's just good and interesting. And really, because at the end of the day, I feel like you have to realize that people like good stuff. They don't like bad stuff. Like, people are still talking about like, the big Marvel movies that mattered to them. Nobody's really talking about Age of Ultron. People are still talking about Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Yeah, it's like, I think you fall into the trap of doing the money grab more frequently in sequels, which I think is part of why I find that sequels are less likely to be as good as the original because of that. Because a lot of times, at least in the original, you're pursuing the story, and then if there's not an authentic story there, but you want to do a sequel anyway, it's almost always clear on some level. Right. And it's much harder to find to stick to the story of it if the story's already done and you're just doing it for money. Here's a good phrasing explanation of it from Lane. Is Scorsese saying, also, he went to NYU, Scorsese did, and so a lot of professors there had him, and they're always just like, Marty was in my class. That was horrible. But anyway, Scorsese, Marty, saying cinema, but meaning our tour. Our tour. I don't know how to say words. Cinema. Guys like Howard Hawks made a bunch of vapid flicks that still get referenced in film classes because Hawks made them.
So no, he in that specific context, and this is only because I read the fucking New York Times article about it and saw him in the actual context what he was talking about. He's talking about movies. He's talking about independent cinema as a whole, as an opportunity to tell personal stories. But I think specifically the Marvel line he was talking about films made with a sense of intentionality. Like where in the editing room, decisions are made to tell a good story and not just because, we have a corporate brand deal and you have to show this car for this many seconds.
Yeah. I think for sure. Here's an interesting question. Why is Loki resonating so much with folks? I feel like peeps are more hyped up for this one than they were for the others. Is there something being done here that's different? Is it just Hiddleston? I think Hiddleston is amazing. Like, I actually don't know anything about him as a person, but I think his work in this is fantastic. And the thing that I caught on the second watch is how much humor is in it. Which, like, when I think of Marvel things, I tend to think of the fact that they're like actiony and like fun and like they feel like comics in that way. But I kind of forget how much like silliness is in them. Kind of like,
I feel like post Guardians of the Galaxy, there was a real shift to like include a lot more jokes in the per capita.
Yeah, and it's fun because like it does, and they found a really good balance of that, I think. And I think that is on full display in this, which is something I noticed again on the second watch. I was like, oh wait, that's like joke. And I was mostly just paying attention to the story the first time, but it was still there being amusing. I wonder why Loki is resonating. I think part of it, frankly, is the theme about choosing your life and having your life planned out for you. Like maybe this is me getting too deep, but I think that like as a culture right now, we're all coming out of this pandemic and a lot of people felt really out of control for a long time, and are trying to figure out like what they're going to do now. And this is like a fun, exciting, action-y way to explore that theme and to like watch somebody else try to grapple with control. So it's like a visceral way vicarious way for people to work through the fact that they felt out of control. I don't know. Is that me going too deep? I feel like that's part of it.
No, I also think actually it is part of this. Feels like a reset in an actually exciting, fresh new direction. Like this is also the first show that really feels like it's technically not the future, but like Black Widow and from what I've told, I haven't seen it. But like a lot of things felt like they've taken place before Infinity War. And like this feels like, oh, this is a new adventure that's fresh. This character was kind of stale, or like they've closed that chapter of the story. This is them making a different choice, going somewhere fresh and new. And I think that's kind of exciting to people. I feel like the idea, also the science fiction idea, which is great, of you have to hunt yourself to prevent yourself from coming to crimes while coming to terms with your own crimes and who you were in the past. Like that's a really interesting, dramatic idea that's totally self-contained. And I think better than the average Marvel film idea.
What was that film we watched with where he had to kill himself with Bruce Willis and he like hunts
Looper.
Looper. It kind of it's like adjacent.
Yes. It's Looper adjacent. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, it does feel fresh. And I think also it's that, in the Marvel films, you meet characters that people really, really like, and you kind of get to see behind the curtain with them, but not a lot. Like you always, it's just like a fundamental difference between film and TV. Film tends to be more objective, driving towards something, and TV tends to be more relationship. And so it's like, it's you know, like when like you're like a show got a movie finally and something about it just feels different and weird and you're like, I can't quite figure it out. It's like that in reverse, like where like my example's horrible, but I remember like loving Lizzie McGuire, and then the Lizzie McGuire movie came out and I couldn't figure out what was so different about it. And I think it's like switching from being so relationship based and like focused on like little interactions, being so focused on a goal. And so getting to spend more time on the relationships with characters that you've known kind of like from afar, I think is something that really appeals to people. It's like getting to meet a celebrity better, you know, like you've seen them doing their thing and like being a fancy hero, and then now you get to kind of slow down with them a little bit more. And I think we like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of things. I think it's also the freshness of the tone of the show, the music, the set design, the feeling. It feels like also narratively, aside from just the story and the character, these people have raised the stakes in a way. Unlike, not the stakes, they've raised the level of danger. These people are more powerful than Thanos in a way. To them, Infinity Stones are nothing. They're outside of time, the timekeepers. It's like kind of like suddenly like, oh, we thought this was the ultimate power. No, no, no. It's this big. And I feel like that is kind of part of what's making this kind of like interesting to the people who care. I got to see this analysis document of all the most famous or all the most popular shows at this exact moment, like relative to how successful they are. Loki is 80 times more viewed than the average new television show right now.
Really? Jeez.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I really wish there was a stat, maybe there is, on how many people are watching it for the first time.
Yeah, a lot of people. Oh, you mean from Marvel, like outside of like?
Yeah, like how many people are coming to this fresh, and how many people are part of the same audience?
I showed you that document.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah. Pretty interesting.
Join the Discord and you can check out some fun stuff that we're posting that we can't necessarily post here, but we can share more like industry stuff in our Discord, and we do whenever we can. The Olsen twin movies. God, there was one that terrified me where they had to go break into a house and there was beekeepers, but they thought that the beekeepers were ghosts. No matter how many times I watched it, I was horrified every single time.
It's a reasonable point of view.
It was very scary. What was I gonna? So Adam, have you seen WandaVision?
I have not.
I'm curious when we do that one. How you feel?
I know the idea, and I know like I've like looked at the first script and stuff. So
yeah, it plays with form in a really interesting way. And I think that when we break that one down in coffee class soon, it's going to be particularly interesting to compare with this and to see what ways they're different and similar. And I think it will probably emphasize some of the choices that were made in Loki, because things were really pushed to the extreme in WandaVision. What is this? Shout out to Owen Wilson. The guy makes every scene better.
I love Owen Wilson.
He's amazing.
It's really nice to see him like act in like something good. No, that sounds terrible, but like he had a bad decade. He did not have a good decade. So it's nice to see him, especially, I don't know, he like had a suicide attempt, really sad personal tragedy stuff, drug addiction.
Man,
and
I didn't know
he's
that.
Doing stuff again. Yeah.
Well, good for him. I'm glad. I'm really okay. So Adam, you've already seen it, but I'm curious for other people who has not seen past the pilot, what do you think the season's about? I've not seen past the pilot.
I know what it's about, but that's just because I
you've cheated.
Well, I know I saw an ad and I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay. Well, when we do WandaVision, do your very best to see where it goes, and then see if you can guess what the deal is.
So, Alexie,
yeah,
this is going to be a time travel adventure where they go to different periods of time to go to the variant Loki's like crimes. That's the basic plot of the season.
Okay. I actually hadn't. I know at the very end they did that thing where they were like, we're going to be in Oklahoma, and then they rolled back the clock, and I was like, wow, we're really going to be in like Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's Oklahoma. Oklahoma's more like Oklahoma. You know, it's new Oklahoma. It's not as Oklahoma-y.
No, old Oklahoma. Yeah, I was like, wow, okay. But I actually, yeah, that makes sense that they're going to be traveling. I imagine they're going to team up, and it's going to constantly be kind of a thing, like where they're like, is Loki going to stick with him, or is he going to betray him? Are they going to betray each other? Trying to hunt down other Loki, and then Loki has to like reflect on who he is by seeing himself do things that are bad. And I assume that we're all kind of building towards like a face-off, like that the big objective is to capture other Loki, which would mean that that he's like the bad guy of season 1.
I hope we get a twist.
Yeah,
we definitely will.
So, oh wow, wait. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Mandela. It's about Loki. There it is.
Be careful what you name your scripts. It could be a spoiler.
It could be a spoiler.
I remember there's a terrible joke out there about people reading the script for There Will Be Blood and being like, well, what if there's going to be blood?
Oh, God. That's like, wasn't there something called like maybe it was a book, like the characters die in the end or something like that?
John dies at the end.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that was still.
It's not my cup of tea.
No.
No.
It's interesting when people can pull that off, but it's
But it's about time travel. I think so. It's sort of
there was like a YA book, like where you're aware that the character is going to die from the beginning, and they say, or like, it's a YA thing, not that they're going to die, but is it 500 Days of Summer or something, like where they're like, this is not a happy story, and then you go through it and you still want it to be a happy story, and then you're like, oh my God, why have you done this to me? It's impressive, and you can pull that off.
You know, you have to think. Information is the power you have over your audience, and the flow of information and the information you withhold. I think every good show is in command of that, because you have to think, like, I think people give exposition a bad rap. You know, they're like, oh, you can't have any exposition, no exposition. And yeah, we don't want you to have a voiceover telling us about things that have already happened to the characters or whatever. But like, when you think about the purpose of exposition is to set up things, because unless an audience understands, they can't appreciate or enjoy what they don't understand. So like, character development means nothing to somebody who doesn't understand like the basic setup. So like in the average TV show, you want to give enough information elegantly and simply enough for people to understand, and then reverse said information, like use the flow of information. You introduce new information that questions the old information. Like, that's kind of the joy of plot writing, you know? Like, I think so many writers, when they're just learning, they're just like so focused on just making like a coherent plot that maybe, you know, they don't necessarily think about like, okay, but if I tell them this, they'll make this assumption. And then when I get them halfway through, I'm going to tell them this that'll make their assumption correct. Like, thinking in those ways, about like, okay, what information do they have when?
Yeah, that's what we do in The Shadows, like down to a T, where they had the joke about like Nadia, like, oh, my lover was beheaded in battle, or like my lover was a warrior and was beheaded, and then later on you learned that she beheaded him.
Yeah.
Not
it's
in
the
battle.
Details that are great.
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it is so joyful, or I should say, pleasurable for an audience to make connections for themselves. Mm-hmm. When somebody goes, "Oh, that's like, that's joy," but when the writer makes the connection for you, it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's like trusting that like your audience is smart. And I think something that I wanted to get into is, am I delayed?
A little bit.
Okay. To me, it seems like you're slightly delayed. So if there's any problem.
No, I was just holding really still.
Okay. In the chat.
See, I did
let
that.
Us know in the
yeah. That's terrible. Terrible. Don't give me a single, don't give me anything. Any ground.
Frown. No. But yes, okay. Yeah, Theo's right. 500 Days of Summer, and I think the other film I was thinking of was Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. But anyway, a few things I wanted to bring up, wanted to talk about was, first, can we talk about the exposition dump that was the video while he was waiting in line?
Yeah, sure.
With his ticket. Because I think it's something that we try to avoid exposition like that. But I think that this worked. And I think the question is like, okay, why? You know? So Adam, do you have a thought about why this was effective? Does anybody?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was saying before. It's the most elegant way so first of all, it's information Loki himself didn't know. And when you have to do exposition like that, like literally a video plays, make it a video that the pivotal character in the scene desperately needs said information. That's like a cheat that makes that work a little bit better. When if it's a video that, yeah, he knows about the blood-sucking zombies. He works at the blood-sucking zombies pest control company. You know, like you have to think, like, is it from the point of view of a character who desperately needs the information? If it is, you can get away with a lot of stuff. Like Inception is one of the most exposition-heavy movies I've ever seen in my life that works well and is good.
Yeah.
And in all of those scenes with Ellen Page and Leonardo DiCaprio, Ellen Page's character exists because she doesn't know the rules. Ellen Page's character doesn't know. Ariadne is the character. Mm-hmm. They don't know the rules of the world. And because they need to know the rules, that's what makes it saying, you know, how dreams works. You know, if it was just Leonardo spouting off to people his members of his team, just for the audience's benefit, that's bad exposition.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's like, we're not just watching the exposition as an audience member, we're in a lot of ways watching Loki watch the exposition. Even though like we're looking at the screen, it's like the experience is us understanding what Loki is understanding. It's not us getting caught up to what Loki already knows. So it doesn't break the fourth wall in that way. Like it doesn't remind us that we're audience who needs information. It feels like we're still alongside Loki and he is seeking information and needs this information. And I think something else that helped with it too is that we didn't open here. Like we opened just like very much getting like thrown in. And there was some explanation there about like you're a variant and blah, 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 and like the opening thing, and like information was still being conveyed, but the real like intense, like I'm going to lay everything out for you moment was later. And it didn't interrupt action, which is I think another thing that people like. Imagine if in the very beginning, when he was captured, when he got teleported away or transported away, he was captured. And then in that moment, the woman explained to him how this works. That would be horrible. And like the momentum would be completely gone. It could have been the same exact information. Like she could have like pulled something out of her pocket and showed it to Loki right then. It could have been the same exact setup, and it would be less interesting because it would break momentum. And it was too early, but by throwing us into it, I think that helped a lot. So I guess that's one thing that I would try to take away from this, is that like the tool of conveying exposition by learning it alongside a character as they really need to know it, and being mindful that you're not breaking the momentum that you've created. So like it came in a moment that was already kind of a downbeat of him waiting in line. And then of course they did it in a way that was like really quirky and fit with the world and had a lot of humor. And that was fun.
For sure. I think an easy way to think about like this sort of thing is it's just sort of a form of pacing.
Yeah.
It's like a form of pacing and like understanding. Like it's like, okay, looking at your existing script through a different filter. What information am I showing in every scene? And just sort of like plot that out, and then just sort of think about that information, like in a very, like you don't have to overly complicate it. It's just a way of looking at material. I just want to add on to this, like it can be paralyzing to be thinking about so many different analytical frameworks and like processes at the same time. Thinking about like information map of your script is like a very editorial specific thing. Like I would highly recommend only doing a draft, or I should say like a scan of your draft where you're just looking at information, for example. Like put that hat on. Okay, and then put another hat where you're trying to make dialogue better. Okay, put on another hat. Like don't do all of these things at the same time, because that's it's kind of debilitating. Like I think people can't do multitasking well. Just do one thing at a time.
And that's, I think, this is something we talk about a lot in writing the feature, and basically anytime we talk about anything ever. But that's the benefit of carding and outlining, is that you can do passes before you've actually written scenes, of making sure that like, okay, have I established everything I need to establish for this scene to work? Like, am I establishing too much in this scene? Like, why is this scene here? Like, what's the pace? And like, if you track like the emotions of the scenes and try to see it through. And then once you've written the draft, we also talk a lot about how helpful it can be to do what Adam was saying, passes with like a specific lens in mind. So like a pass for dialogue, a pass for exposition, a pass for all these things, rather than overwhelming yourself. I think that's a great note.
I feel like so many scripts that are mediocre only because the writer didn't do enough drafts. But they didn't do enough drafts in like an organized, clear way. Like, you don't have to be a genius to make great work, but you have to have like a system that leverages the best of who you are. Like, if you're looking at a story and you're just looking at one thing, you can really put a deeper level of focus on that one thing with the mental resources you have. Yeah, not all writers have the same level of intelligence or insight or empathy and all that stuff, but I think you might be surprised at how much you can improve your work by just like doing a pass of one thing, doing a pass of like really break up your drafts into like lots of little pieces, and like be organized, and to trust yourself. I know people, I know one writer at least, who she does prose, and she's a published novelist, done a bunch of stuff, very talented. She does one pass after her second draft, where she just makes a note of every reference to time.
Oh, weird. That's interesting.
Because in novels, it can be really easy to like lose the track of like, okay, what day was it here? What time of day was it? Did it make sense for them to spend an hour in that apartment if they had to go across to the city? Like, every reference of time, she just sort of she does a whole pass of her novel where she just like catalogs and makes sure everything makes sense. Not to say you have to do that in the same way.
I do that similarly for scripts a lot of times, especially when it's like a freaking road movie or something, which I end up accidentally writing all the time. It's like, after you kind of know the things you want them to do, you like go back through and you're like, okay, like what is their like itinerary? Like, what does this actually look like? And does it make sense? Like, am I having them do a bunch like 17 night things in a row? Like, that I have like day, night, day, night, day, night. Now they've been there for like a year. I don't, like, how that's really smart. I'd not thought of the fact that I was doing that, but I've definitely done that in in scripts, and I can imagine it's only more so in novels.
Novels are. I admire people who have the time to really spend time on that.
That reminds me of like the other path. Like there's a few different passes you can do, but just to give more examples, another one is tracking place, like space and place. So it's like where, like if you're having these two characters having a conversation, where are they and like what are they doing and where are they in the space? Because like you lose that, especially in a script where action is much more sparse.
Right.
You need to know where people are, and like what they're doing and how to imagine them in space. Because as the writer, you're probably sitting there picturing the final movie, but as the as a reader, you're just.
But when you're going through that, making the notes of places, if you start like judging, like, oh god, the dialogue is so terrible in this scene, I have to start changing. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Also, I something I learned from you, Alexie, was really to embrace the bad version. Just for like to be okay.
I feel like that is a backhanded compliment.
No. Like, because first of all, everybody writes the bad version. Like, but I've always been like, I've been embarrassed by my bad version. Whereas I feel like, you have to. I think the healthy thing is just accept that the first time you put a scene onto paper, you're zero draft, like you're just birthing ideas, like all those little, even if it's outlined, you're making it happen on the page. To be okay with it, and actually expect and hope that it's like, that could be better. Like they fight.
That was the thing that you and I, because in case you all didn't know, Adam and I were writing a script together, and we need to pick it back up because
I know. Once I'm done
moving in life, but that was one of the things that was kind of difficult, is because we'd not written together before, and so we were like getting hung up on. I think we were honestly getting a little bit hung up on showing each other our work, because it was like, is this where I want it yet? And then eventually we had to
I want this to be really clean before Alexie can look at it. And I feel like we're now at the point where it's sort of like, it doesn't give a shit. Who gives?
Yeah, now we're like, whatever. Here,
I know that I can put good pages together. You can put good pages together. It's like a trusting the process sort of thing,
And that's the thing I think that like is really important in writers groups and things, is like when you're able to go through in a group and be like, everybody right now, we're reading this for story. Like, don't be freaking obnoxious about the dialogue that doesn't flow. Like, don't go through this with us and help us know if these events make sense. And I think that that's something that, at least in our writers group, because right now we're starting a project next week where we're writing.
Oh my God, yeah, we should plug that.
Yeah. So if you want to with us in our writers room, which is a group in our Patreon, there should be a link in the description. We're doing our first ever pilot development lab, which is a 3-month-long summer project where a small group of writers are going to get together and write pilots, write their dream pilot, like the thing that they wish was on TV, their own original pilot, along with like a little pitch book or a Bible and a pitch. And we're all going to do it together and get into small groups that are super supportive and nice. And it's a really fun group of people. So if you want to do that, check out the Patreon, or you can come to the Discord and ask us more questions there.
And anybody who participates in this summer development lab, which is going to be about 3 months, you'll get our free course, you'll get our to be announced paid course, writing the pilot, for free. And we'll also read your script when we can give notes on it personally when it comes to time. So.
And that's
when
just
it comes
our
to time. Like, oh my God.
When it comes to time.
When it comes to time.
Yeah. And that's just if you're in our Patreon, then you can do the pilot thing. It's not an additional cost. It's not something tacked on. But something else I wanted to bring up before we completely ran out of time was just thinking about, like, aside from the exposition, like what we already talked about with that exposition dump right in the with the video, what would you take or not take from this LOKI pilot as you write your own original pilot? Yeah,
that's a good question. Personally, for me, I I love the plot device. I love the setup. I love the setup of hunting yourself. Like, I really like the way they introduced kind of the culture of the world. I feel like my notes are my experience is more like I like the aesthetic and intention of the show more than like any one specific thing. Like, I really like where they're coming from.
I think for me it was knowing who your audience is and leaning into it is the thing that I would say, and like trusting that your audience is smart is another part of it. And of course, like when you already have a budget, like no one was writing a spec of Loki and then pitching it, you know, like when you already
that was greenlit the moment what's his name said it, you know, like, oh, they'll be like, oh yeah, great.
Yeah. So
we
like
have Tom on contract.
It's like it's not quite the same thing because of that reason, but they do really just accept that they know who their audience is, they know who this is for, and they're writing it for that person. And that's a thing with a lot of writing, like copywriting especially, or just in general. It's like knowing who your audience is and writing for them rather than trying to write for everyone. Writing something that you would want to see rather than writing something that like everybody would want to see. I think that to me is a big takeaway. Just like remembering that you can write for specific people. And yeah, that's my biggest one, I think. Do you all have any takeaways you'd want to throw in? But if not, I can talk a little bit about what we're doing next week.
Yeah, let's do that and we wrap up.
So we are doing another pilot, one I'm very excited about that I don't think you've seen it yet.
I have not. I'm looking forward to it.
We are doing Mayor of Easttown. Kate Winslet with an incredible accent, doing her very best.
I mean, she's English.
Huh?
She's English.
Is she English?
Yeah.
I don't know what she is, but she's doing an accent that's definitely not hers because it's from like Delco, Pennsylvania, which is like.
Oh, I'm sure. No, but my point was that English actors tend to be really good at accents.
Oh, is that what it is?
Much more than Americans. That's just my experience. You ever heard of Americans trying to do a British accent? It's terrible.
I remember that like House, the TV show House, the guy got criticized for laughing with an English accent. I'm like, we're horrible.
His American accent was so good though.
It was so, like, I have any idea.
No, like that's such a specific.
I know, they were like, he laughs to English, but that was like the first time I ever encountered, like I ever knowingly watched a show and realized later that the actor was doing an accent that wasn't theirs. Mm-hmm. Like to that extent, that was the first time that ever happened, and it blew my mind. But yeah, Mayor of Easttown, I'm super excited about it because it's got a lot of really intense themes. So first off, if you are cautious about what you watch, like if certain content bothers you, I would recommend checking out the like content warnings because it is intense. It's about a detective in a small town investigating a crime. I don't want to give away too much, but anyway.
Yeah, don't give away.
Detective investigating crime, which obviously can be connected to things that might upset people. So just look into that. But the characters are phenomenal. I mean, other things that we're not necessarily looking at, like the acting is phenomenal. But it's a really good show and a lot of people are talking about it. So we might as well know it together.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. That's it for me.
That's it for me. So we're at an hour, which is perfect.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for coming by. I hope that this was helpful. And again, if you want to continue the conversation or check out the writers group or just come hang out with us on Discord, which is open to anybody, you can check the links in the description. And otherwise, we will see you next week when we talk about the pilot for Mayor of Easttown.
Amazing. All right, guys.